Right, welcome to this week's episode of the Old Paratrooper podcast. And today I'm joined with former fighter pilot, author, and motivational speaker, Mandy Hickson. How you doing, Mandy? All right?
I'm good, thanks, Chris. How are you doing?
I am brilliant. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I know, obviously, you're all over the place at the minute, different kind of events and all sorts of bits and bobs. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to come on. It means a lot to me, that.
It's my pleasure. It's always lovely to chat to someone who I'm sure has got just as many, if not more, life experiences than me, Chris, to be honest.
Well, I've done a little bit. I'm not more than some, not as much as others, but yeah, it's good. It's good to try and get out there and have as many experiences as possible, isn't it? That's what I'm all about, and it sounds like you are too. So, no, brilliant stuff.
Definitely.
What I like to do with all the podcast is I like to just get a bit of a rough background about yourself, where you grew up, what you were like at school, and kind of ultimately what led you down the path you took in life. So, yeah, over to you.
Sure. So I grew up in Manchester, just in the outskirts of Manchester. So that's like Sale. My mum always described it as Cheshire, but I think you'll find its postcode is Manchester Mum. Yeah, I went to a state school, state educated all the way through. I was I loved school. I was one of those work hard, play hard people. Very, very sporty. So I was in all the sports teams, did county sport, and also because there wasn't like, it's not like today where there's so many other things that people can get on with regards to sort of social media or streaming devices. These are the days of growing up when you used to go and call for a mate, and say, are they playing? And then you'd go and play in the street for hours. And so I then joined, as soon as I could, all of the different clubs that are out there, things like Air Cadets. On the very first night that they opened their doors to girls, I joined that. I was in the Brownies and the Guides, and then I actually went and joined the Rangers, or Ventures, as it was called. And and I made loads of great friends doing all of those sides of things as well. So I was always a real joiner, and I always loved that camaraderie and the team spirit. And I was also quite a natural leader as well. So I ended up in sort of quite a lot of different leadership roles really sort of early on, even in my school days, from sort of the head girls to sort of the head of the Rangers to, head of the cadets and all of those things. So, yeah, it was probably innately sort of, there was a leadership spirit to me as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Them groups, I never got involved in any of them sort of groups when I was a kid. I did a little kind of experience with the military at 15, and that's what kind of set me off. But there seems to be a lot of people that go through sort of the cadet route and all that, and then that kind of leads on, well, naturally, as you'd kind of expect. So when did you kind of decide? Because I don't want to sound out of turn here, but it's not really, well, you certainly probably back when you did, it wasn't necessarily a profession that females go down, is it? As like a kind of fast jet pilot.
No.
So what was that choice? Where did you come for?
Yeah, so my grandpa was a pilot in the Air Force, and I'd grown up hearing his stories, and he drip fed them, sort of his, all the incredible sort of missions he might have been on. And when I joined the Air Cadets, I flew for the first time. And I remember I went up in a Chipmunk, which is now in a museum, which just shows how old I am, which is worrying. But I remember very clearly saying to the pilot at the end of it, do you get paid for this? And he said, yeah, this is my job. This is my career. And it was this sort of moment whereby two worlds sort of came together of, gosh, I'm doing something that I love. This is great fun, flying. And I think flying is one of these incredible things to do, especially as a young person, where you just, I sort of describe it as like dancing in the air, finding the freedom to be up there. And it was really powerful. And I thought, my God, if you could do this as a career, that is amazing. And also growing up in Manchester, my dad ran a carpet business. My mum was a teacher. And it was very traditional sorts of roles. And I don't know, I'd probably always seen my mum and with this sort of feeling of she goes to work because you have to earn money. And suddenly there was someone saying you could do this as a career and it's a passion. And I realised that actually that was exactly what I wanted to do. But one of the big stoppers at that point was the fact women weren't allowed to be pilots in the Air Force. So that was quite a big showstopper for me, really. But, like I often say nowadays, what do you do when you choose the impossible dream? You just got to chip away at it. And actually, it's that constant moving in the right direction, taking every opportunity that's given to you so that when the rules did change, which was while I was at university, I was actually in a really, really good position then to apply, because I'd done all of those things that needed to be done, you know, flying scholarships, gained my private pilot's license with money I'd literally saved up from my newspaper round.
Wow.
A lot of years of saving, I can tell you, carrying the Manchester, what was it, the Messenger, the Sailor Altria Messenger on the back of a bike, you know, oh my gosh, I remember, you know, posting hundreds and thousands of these blooming newspaper. But it paid off in the end because I got my license, went to uni in Birmingham, and then the second year when I was there, they changed the rules allowing women to join.
Wow, that is, yeah, you would literally in exactly the right place then, weren't you? At uni, they changed the rules. So obviously you then continued and completed. What did you study at uni, if you don't mind me asking?
I did a very important degree for being a pilot, which was geography and sports science.
Oh, right, okay.
I can run with a map, basically, as
wow.
So yeah, everyone takes the mickey out of me for that one. But yeah, it was at Birmingham University. It was a joint honours degree, and actually, it was the sports science was much harder than the geography, actually, which doesn't surprise most people. That if anyone's been into studying sports psychology, physiology, I think that I'm absolutely passionate about that side of things. So that was really interesting. Yeah, and then I joined the University Air Squadron, which is another club. It's like a continuation of the Air Cadets, really, for people at uni. And of all the people that I joined with, absolutely everybody tried to apply to join at the end of it. So it's a great recruiting tool that the Air Force have to really encourage their graduates to join the Air Force as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just touching on what you said there about, you find the job that that is your passion. I try and inspel this to my children and kind of say to them, look, if you find a job that you enjoy, you'll never really work a day in your life, because you go, and I know it's a bit of an old adage, but if you really enjoy, like people get the probably the Sunday night blues, as I like to call them. In my profession now as a firefighter, I don't get them because
yeah,
isn't it? Because you spend a lot of your time at work. So if you find something like obviously you did, then absolutely brilliant. You love it. It's the way forward, isn't it?
It is, and actually, I still find that now. Actually, that I do sort of keynote speaking, motivational speaking, and I get excited when I'm going to events. I'm going to shock you here. I'm a real extrovert, so I love meeting new people. So, the joy for myself to go into a room with complete strangers and have the that huge opportunity to share my story, to take questions, to hopefully look at mindsets and create mindset change and cultural change within businesses, but also with young people particularly. There's never once I think, oh, I've got to go and do it. It's really uplifting, and even if I'm feeling quite flat or tired before I go and do it, I come out buzzing because there is this real energy that you can create from doing those sorts of things. And I just think how lucky it is that I've done 2 careers that I absolutely love.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, you kind of, no, hats off to you. So you've gone through, how long was uni then? 4 years?
Just did 3 years, and when they changed the rules, I was in my second year, so I applied to join, and I failed all of the computer-based tests, and I could only do them twice. So I went and did them in my last year, and I failed them all again. And I was really lucky that I was on this University Air Squadron, and the boss of this club just sort of thought, well, this doesn't add up. Mandy's flying really well, physically, actually in the air. Why can't she translate that skill set into passing these aptitude tests? And so he started to investigate and found out that the majority of women taking the test were failing them compared to men. And there was this unconscious bias that was existing within the testing system that they'd been completely unaware of because they'd never been tested on men before, on women, before. And so they offered me a commission in the end, but not to become a pilot, to become an air traffic controller. And I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. But again, in that old mindset of moving forward, choosing the impossible dream, take an opportunity, because I thought once I'm in, then I can try to change their minds or change the case. And I did. And I joined the Air Force as an air trafficker, signing up to serve, for to your 38th birthday, so 17 years time in a career that you have no desire to follow. That was a really big leap of faith. But once I was in, I wrote so many letters, and eventually I think I just wore them down. I got this letter back and it just said, "Dear Flying Wells, the RAF will give you a branch change to pilot." I thought, yeah, I've broken them. And then it said, We are, however, taking one as a test case. You know, we'd like to find out how far through the flying training system someone with no aptitude can get before they fail.
All right, okay.
And
That's a bit of a downer, isn't it?
yeah. So, I mean, what do you reckon that did? I mean, I often ask this to people, and that's nearly always 90% come back with what that would have done to me. What do you reckon that did, that letter?
Well, it quite simply would have, what it would have done me would have been, right, I will show you exactly what I can do, and then prove them wrong.
Well, that is what most people would assume. But it's a really interesting concept, isn't it? Because when you set yourself a goal, you know, you're going to become a paratrooper or you want to be a firefighter. If you then say in brackets, but I'm never going to get there, then ultimately you're going to change your entire mindset on that goal setting. So if you say, I'm going to run a marathon, this is my plan, I'm going to do couch to 5K. Once I get to that, it's going to be 10K. It's going to be the strategic steps. But they were basically saying to me, we're going to give you the chance to be a pilot, but by the way, let's see how far you get before you fail. And it planted a seed of doubt that I'd never had before. So I think up to then, I'd always been really confident, you know, not arrogant, not ego. There was no ego, but a very confident young person. And suddenly they were telling me I would fail. And that really pulled that rug out from under me because, you know, you're starting one of the hardest training programs in the world. And it's going to last about 4 years. It's about £3.5 million worth of investment in those days. I don't even know how much it is now. And, you know, that is going to be a big leap of faith to say, right, I'm going to have to prove them wrong. But at the same time, every time I struggled, my default setting would be, well, it's because I'm not good enough. It's because I failed the tests. And so that's, it's like this real mismatch that's going on in my brain now all the time. And it was a really big psychological barrier. It planted a seed that, you know, grew probably to be imposter syndrome that I wasn't really aware of what it was called. But now we talk a lot about imposter syndrome, and that's exactly what it gave me.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? But I get where you're coming from. Yeah, it's like, because it's like almost sounds like an impossible task. If they'd just said to you, well, you know, and not even said that part, you'd have gone and it'd probably been a lot easier journey for you anyway. But for
Yeah.
them to, well, am I right in thinking, were you the first female to kind of to go through that training, or?
No, I wasn't. So basically, there was Jo Salter, who was she was already in the Air Force when they changed the rules, and so she was in a perfect position to swap straight across.
Right.
Whereas for the sort of batch that I came through, we had to all finish our degrees, then apply, and then join. So Jo actually ended up qualifying. Oh, I think it was in about 93. I think so. I think it was around about that. So she went through in this first tranche. And then there was a sort of gap, really, where they were now basically taking people that were recruiting from the start to go through rather than people that were in the Air Force and wanted to swap across. And so I ended up being, well, the second woman to fly the Tornado GR, but I was the first to fly the GR4. And I only say that because, you know, there's this lots of stuff going, people going, but you weren't the first to fly the GR4. And I said, Jo Salter never flew the GR4, she flew the GR1. And it was only because someone pointed it out and said, I don't know if Jo would have ever flown the GR4, Mandy. And I was like, oh my God, can I be the first then? I was like, yes! Happy days.
Yeah, no, definitely. Why not? No, brilliant. So yeah, it's yeah, it is a very, very difficult one, like I say, and it's all the way through that's going to chip away at you, isn't it? Every time you kind of come unstuck at a task, you're gonna think, and obviously you're gonna have that. And the reason I say this as well, my fiance, she's a firefighter as well, and she kind of faces, well, she did do, but there is still that kind of stigma, and obviously way back then as well, with you being like a one of maybe a few females applying for that role, it's always going to be difficult because even you find that even if you get through, you're going to have that criticism. And I don't, you tell me where it'd be like, well, you've only got it because you're a woman. Did you get that, or did you find that?
Yes and no, not so much actually, because, you know, I think interestingly, there were a few problems in that first batch of girls that were going through. So Jo got through, brilliant. She was a really talented aviator. And then 2 women were going through with her and they weren't quite making the grade. And so a lot of extra trips were thrown their way and a lot of extra training. And the guys around them who were hitting the same points were being chopped because they weren't good enough. And so now the instructors were getting really, really bitter because they were being forced to put more hours and more training into people that weren't making the grade. and there felt this mismatch. And so there was a lot of anger within the instructor community at that period. So I was really lucky in some ways, because there was quite a holding system going on, which meant you'd finish a course and rather than just going straight on to the next one, you'd be doing an admin job somewhere for maybe a year waiting for the next training course to come up. And actually in that period, it meant that almost 3 years had elapsed, and a tour of duty is 2.5 to 3 years. So a lot of the instructors that were quite bitter about women coming through the system and this, God, we've got to pass them, suddenly had changed. And so that whole feeling of, you know, we were coming through on our own abilities, because we were good enough, and so actually we didn't pick up too much interior criticism, really. Thank goodness.
Yeah, it's like you say, I'm just thinking of the time frame, because obviously back then things like that, I mean, you know, it's the same sort of thing with the females joining the fire service back
Yep.
then. It was kind of, I think nowadays, like, I like to think nowadays that people are kind of over that they just kind of, they don't, but
Yeah.
there is still elements of that, and I think you'll always will have. Yeah, I don't know why, but also I think sort of organizations push impossible targets as
Yeah.
well. And I know I've had this conversation multiple times with my fiance about how they try and push the whole trying to get 50-50
Oh,
females in the fire service.
it's
And
ridiculous.
it's impossible, because
It's even
a lot of females don't want to do that role.
Yeah, I completely agree, actually. And have you ever come across Sabrina Cohen-Hatton? She's a female firefighter down in Surrey. She's actually the chief
I haven't
fire
heard of her.
officer down in Surrey and
Oh,
Sussex.
I have. Yeah, I have heard of her name. Yeah.
She's written a book called In the Heat of the Moment, which is brilliant, actually, all about decision making, literally in the heat of the moment in a firefighter's world. And she talks about the sexism and the misogyny, you know, as being rife when she first joined. She's really petite, got an incredible figure. She's about 5'1", 5'2" or something. And of course, the amount of criticism that she would get saying you're not strong enough, and then she'd say, "Okay, you're 6'6". How are you going to get into that very small gap?" So it's about recognizing that we need all different shapes and sizes to do different
Definitely.
things, don't we? And there is a role for everybody. But much like with the military, you can't go for 50-50, because, you know, you're not going to get that target. And also, if you did, and then you've now got 50-50 pilots flying in fast jets on the front line, and then, you know, half the women at the age of 30 to 35 decide to get pregnant and have children, well, then you're losing half of that. So you've got to almost have a third more. So this whole, like, the numbers don't add up. And so, yes, keep it open to everyone, keep the options there, but don't make it such a ridiculous target that you're trying to strive to achieve something that's not possible.
Yeah, it is about being realistic, and like you said there, that's the whole team environment, isn't it? And that's why, and it is. I'm 6'2" and 16 stone, so there is certain windows. There's even big windows I can't get through. That my fiance, because she's quite small, she can, and it is about recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of a team, and you know, there is physiological differences between male and females, certainly with strength in certain aspects and stuff like that. So it's a bit kind of, you've got to understand the different abilities, and I'm sure that's exactly the same in your profession, you know, as a fighter pilot and stuff.
I mean,
you've got your different.
Of course. I mean, the aircraft doesn't know if it's a man or a woman flying it. You know, there's going to be no real differences in how you operate with regards to flying. It doesn't take strength to be a fast jet pilot, so there's nothing there on the physiological side that would stop someone from doing that role. It's just more on the you know, the dynamics and the physiological, the fact that, you know, women will potentially want to have children at some point.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. So onto your training, because firstly, I want to know, sort of, if you could sort of break it down again for kind of like the viewers and people listening to the podcast, because, well, I'm for me as well, because I'm not going to understand your kind of basic training and what's required. So how long does the training, obviously you do basic training the same as everyone else, but you'd already gone into the services in another role, hadn't you? So
yeah, so, well, I initially signed up as an air traffic controller, and I was halfway through officer training when I heard that I'd got the branch change to pilot. So it didn't, you know, take away, I didn't ever start actually air traffic control training. So yeah, we did 6 months at that stage as officer training, and then we held, waiting for our initial flying training courses to start. It was called elementary. I was going to be skipping that stage because I had enough hours from the University Air Squadron flying days, but we ended up holding for so long that they realised that they couldn't just put us straight onto the next stage and miss that out, because we wouldn't have actually flown for about 2.5 years by then. So we went back and we did a shortened course on elementary flying training of about, I think it was about 40 or 50 hours, which was great. And from that I was streamed to fly on the Tucanos to go on the fast jet route, which was nice. So we went off to do our basic flying training at Linton-on-Ouse in York, where we did about a year flying the Tucano, which was a real step up, because up to that point I'd only been flying small propeller aeroplanes, and suddenly I was flying something with a retractable undercarriage, turboprop, going at double the speed, which is really nice. So each stage it doubles the speed. So you're not going straight from nothing to flying a Tornado. And that course lasted about a year. I then held again for another year, and so then I had to go back and refresh on the Tucano to make sure that when I then started at in Valley and Anglesey to flying the Hawk, which for people that don't know is the same one that the Red Arrows fly, so a small, very agile fast jet. Yeah, so I did a quick refresher, and then I went back and started flying the Hawk, and I loved that. That's broken down into 2 different courses. You do the basic course on one squadron on one side of the airfield, and when you pass that, you then got given your wings, and then you would do advanced weapons training, which was learning how to do bombing and strafing and air-to-air combat, and flying weaponeering, and then putting it all together in these big simulated attack profiles, which was the most complex flying I've ever done. And that course lasted about, it must have been about 14 months, I think, something around that time. So that's really intense. I mean, they described that as doing an advanced driving test twice a day for 10 months, and it's just, wow, it's just shocking. So that's really, really stressful. And then you finish that. Yeah. And then they stream you at the end of that to see what aircraft you are more capable to fly based on your skills, your abilities, and also your choice. So it might be that someone doesn't particularly like air-to-air combat, and so there's no point putting them in to fly in an air defense role where all they'll be doing is flying air-to-air combat. So I absolutely loved low-level flying, and I loved the ground attack role, so the bombing, the strafing, the weaponeering side of things, and so I naturally chose to do that. I wasn't good enough to fly single seats, which would be Harrier and Jaguar at the time, so the natural aircraft for me to fly would be Tornado GR4 or GR1 at the time. And so we then were posted up to Lossiemouth in Scotland, and I was on #1 course. It went from being a big tri-national training course down at Cottesmore, and it started as the first national operational conversion unit to fly the Tornado, and that was a massive step up. Flying the Tornado was just like going from flying a Mini to flying a Formula 1 car sort of feel to it. That's what I felt anyway. So yeah.
No, I can't even kind of imagine. Is it like, obviously everyone's seen the films, Top Gun and everything else. Is it as Ali, the word, obviously, I'm not going to insult your intelligence, but you've heard the phrase Ali. It tends to be a parachute regiment thing, but is it as good an Ali as, you not heard the word Ali?
No, I haven't really.
No, it's a parachute regiment term. It's about looking when something's good and you look good doing it, like you mixed dress and and is I suppose, is it as good as it looks?
It should be, as it says it will be on the tin. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, I think Top Gun, I mean, some of the flying scenes in the latest Top Gun in Maverick were just brilliant, and actually, yeah, it was quite representative of what you're doing. Low level flying down valleys, really low level, dropping weapons on targets within 5 seconds, enemy aircraft, be it them the instructors training you up, trying to get behind you into your 6 o'clock to simulate shooting you down. So all of those things are exactly what you're doing, and you're traveling between 420 to 520 miles an hour. And at about 250 feet, so that's the height of an electrical pylon. We loved, one of the areas I loved actually was working with the forward air controllers, so getting talked on via what's called the 9 line. Did you ever deal with the 9 line? Yeah. So, you'd be talked on by forward air controllers. You're coming down a valley and they'd sort of say, are you visual with the wood? Yeah, visual with wood, left of wood, single tree. Yeah, visual, and you get all this information and they literally talk you onto your target, but you're traveling at 420 miles an hour. they've got to be really good, and they were bloody brilliant. I mean, I loved working with them, and then we would be able to drop weapons, and that skill set, you know, played out massively in Afghanistan. I didn't do the Afghan conflict, so I'd left the squadron by then, but you know, that sort of forward air controlling and working hand in hand with the ground attack with the Tornadoes was unbelievable.
Well, there you go again. It comes back to that. There is no kind of part of the military that's about working on your own. It's all, even though you're in this kind of millions of pounds worth of piece of equipment, you're still relying on, you know, the eyes and ears of people on the ground to bring you onto targets and stuff. So the military in general is just such a big organization where, and it's took me a long time to understand that you get a little bit brainwashed with Power Age when you're in, and probably a lot of units that, you know, the other units aren't as good. And I understand why they do it. It kind of makes the soldiers that they are, but it's not until you're out and you realize that, look, you know, there are other units out there that play massive parts in big cogs in the wheel and everything else. So yeah, I suppose that's just proof there, isn't it, that you kind of, everyone plays a massive part.
They do, and I mean, they use this one about 2,000 people to launch one aircraft in a war zone on the front line. Now, if you think that's going to include everyone from the design people right at the start, the engineers, with the likes of, say, British Aerospace, right the way through to, you know, the people who are literally touching the aircraft just before you get airborne. So 2,000 people in that chain and 63 trades in the Air Force, you know. And it was fascinating. I was doing a speech recently, and I don't normally say this trade in particular, but I don't know why I did. But I say, you know, the catering staff, if they get it wrong, no one's going to war. You know, we all do march on our stomachs, so to speak. But I said, you know, people might say, well, what's the role of a bands person? And I said, but ultimately, if you think about the public opinion of the military, what do they often comment on? The military marching bands. So actually, there's a real part of a military marching band in the morale, in public opinion, PR, all of those things. It's so important. And then this woman came up to me at the end of the talk and she said, I can't believe you talked about bands person. I'm a bands person in the Air Force, you know, and I'm just here on an internship. I'm leaving, and so I'm doing this crossover. And I thought, my God, I've never ever used bands person as an example. For some reason, I just used it there and then.
Yeah.
There happened to be someone in the audience, you know, which was just, what a coincidence. But yeah, it is true. You need to think about everybody, and don't think you're special just because you're in the paras or just because you're a fast jet pilot. You know, you might be the person that's right at the very end of that line, the last cog in the machine, but my goodness, you're not going to get there without everybody else.
No, 100%. And it is good that you do recognise that. And I think that's more of a thing now. I think it's more recognised probably than it was years ago. And I don't know whether that's because of the kind of social media information is such readily available now, and you can see what the units do. You couldn't in my time, and probably the same as with yourself, you didn't know unless you worked with them direct really what the other units kind of did. It were a bit like, you know, you're a bit narrow-minded to it, but then obviously now you see a lot on social media, and there's a lot of units push out their own promotional videos, and you go, oh God, they do some really good stuff, don't they? So you know, that's part of it, I think. And certainly, I know the RAF push out a lot of good videos, but that's because they've got a massive budget, haven't they? And you know, the lobster that they get and all that kind of stuff. And, you know,
I didn't agree with you. I always just thought the paras were mad. I mean, why would you jump out of a serviceable aircraft? Let's be brutally honest.
No, there is that aspect. There is, you know, there is a certain element of craziness within the parachute regiment battalions. I'll go with that.
I did do a little bit of parachuting actually as a bit of an adventure training, because I did one while I was at university, and I'd never had something that scared me as much in my life as jumping out and doing this parachute jump for charity. And then when I was in the Air Force, you know, and I thought, I don't like the fact that there's something in my psyche that I'm really scared of. So when an opportunity came up to do a parachuting course, I signed up to do it at Netheravon. And I was halfway through the course, and I was starting to pack my own parachutes, and I'd been jumping out, and I found out I was pregnant, and I was like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't carry on with the course.
Yeah,
so I always
probably not the best thing. Yeah.
So I say to him, I said, you've been parachuting, sweetheart. You just were unaware of it at the time.
Well, the kind of the military jumping is horrible. I never liked the military jumping, and I did a few static line jumps over the years with the military. But when I actually went and I did a bit of a free fall in New Zealand when I was traveling, and that was just effortless. It was just, you know, it was a totally different kind of kettle of fish having that hundreds of pounds worth of kit strapped to you in a chute, jumping out of a C-130 at like 130 mile an hour. But it's not normal, is it? It's not normal whether you do it for fun or you do it. It's a bit bizarre.
Yeah, it is.
But so I suppose moving on from that, I suppose tours wise, obviously once you pass your training. So how long in total was the training? It sounds like a long time.
I joined in 94 and I got to the squadron in November of 98. So it's basically about just over 4 years, 4.5 years really, to get to the front line. So yeah, I mean, I love the Tornado. I mean, the difference between the Tornado was up to that point, I remember thinking really clearly that I felt at this defining line. And it was that up to that point, everything that you were doing, you were being assessed for, and they were trying to see if you were good enough. Once you got to Tornado, you're suddenly in this jet where you've got a moving map. You've got a navigator sitting in the back who's there to help you to ensure that you do the best job as a team together. And it's almost like, oh my God, they're not like trying to chop you anymore. They're not trying to prove that you're not good enough or you've got to prove you aren't good enough. It's suddenly like, this is the jet that you're going to go to war in. So now we know you can fly. We need to teach you how to fight. And there was this real difference of realizing that this jet is designed to do a job, and you're now going to be trained to do that job in that jet. And that was a real sort of differential between hitting capacity, trying to overload you. Will you be able to cope in a moment in combat when you get shot at by a missile? To right, let's make sure that you have got the capacity, and we're going to teach you all the the tricks of the trade to ensure that you're going to do a really good job.
Yeah, so I suppose almost like a little bit like the pressure. Not, I wouldn't say the pressure was off, because whichever aspect you look at it, from my perspective anyway, it seemed like a high pressure job. There's a lot of, you can't have like a time when you can have a moment where you switch off, can you? If you're doing that type of kind of speeds that close to the ground, and the slightest error, that's game over, isn't it? So
it is. Yeah, I mean, literally, one wrong move and you would die as a consequence. So yeah, that's that. So yeah, it's challenging, and you need to be alert at all times, and that's why they train you to the level they do. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, so tours wise, so obviously you said you'd left the squadron before Afghanistan sort of materialized, as it were. So what about, did you go to Iraq? Am I right in thinking you did Iraq?
Yeah, I did. So I did 3 tours of Iraq, which was about 45 combat missions in total over a 3-year period. So we were rolling sort of 2 to 4 months, dependent on how long you needed to be out there for at the time. And so we were defending the no-fly zone over southern Iraq, which was sort of the time period between the 2 Gulf Wars, when there was activity happening. They were obviously building up troops. There were things going on, moving around. There were plenty of surface-to-air missiles out there, and that's the sort of job you were doing. So yeah, it was challenging. My first tour particularly, I had a bit of a shock. I was bullied by one gentleman, which sort of really pushed me to the edge and thinking, gosh, was this really what I wanted to do? It was quite a misogynistic environment as well. I mean, I was given every time I went out there, I was given a room which was wall-to-wall pornography. There was no female toilets. I mean, there was no female flying kit or anything like that. So it was a real be there, cope, get on with it sort of feel to it.
Yeah, it's still like, it's hard to get your head around that's the way it used to be, isn't it? With like I say, the way the world is now, it's that people don't even think of it as being like that. But obviously you've been there. And I can imagine, again, I was in the military about the same sort of times as you. I think as you got to your squadron in 98, I'd been in about a year. But yeah, it's not ideal, is it? So
No.
I suppose, what hairy moments you've had somewhere you kind of, have you ever had a kind of an instance where you've had like a malfunction? Because with like everything, it's great when it works, isn't it? Everything's brilliant when it works. We say this at work in my current profession: when the pump's working, you're pumping water, and there's people in it, it's brilliant. So when it stops working, it's that, oh shit, what do I do now? So I suppose a bit different with a fast jet. It's a bit like, right, quick thinking. So have you had any of them moments where
Yeah, plenty. Loads of sort of minor emergencies. You know, I did have one incident where we were coasting in, so heading over the water, and then you pull up to about 1,000 feet to go over the coast, so you try and avoid birds because that's where they tend to amalgamate. And yeah, we hit a massive seagull. Um, so so yeah, so we hit this big seagull, and it was ingested into our engine. It took out all of our forward-looking infrared. It was pretty hairy actually, and we had to sort of pull up to height, and we got up to height, and we called, you know, Mayday, and the nearest airfield was Prestwick in Scotland, and we ended up on a direct route towards Prestwick. And as we got there, there was a jumbo jet 747 coming into land, and it was told to go around because this fast jet was coming in. I'll never forget. We pulled in, we landed, and we just touched off the runway, and then I saw this enormous jet coming in. I thought, oh yeah, that's the one. So yes, that was one pretty hairy one. So that was good. And then another time, you know, basically over in the Gulf, I've had a couple of incidents. One where I was shot at by a surface-to-air missile, which was a particularly close call. And yeah, and then there was another one where we had a hydraulic failure, and we had to take what's called the RAG, which is the arrestor cable that sits at the end of the runway. And so we had to blow our gear down, and you're not sure if it's taken, and you know, so we land, and you put the hook down, and then it brings you to a massive halt. It feels like you're landing on a carrier, like you're sort of some sort of you know, sort of a ship one. So yes, that's that. But yeah, so it was all that sort of thing was, yeah, pretty challenging.
Yeah, well, you kind of very skipped over there one. You were like, oh yeah, there was just dead blasé about. Well, there was this surface-to-air missile that were fired up. You know, just one of them things. But how did that come about? Was that overseas in on an op? I'm assuming it was on an op, because if it were in the UK, I think we might have heard about it.
That would have been a bit worrying, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it just?
Yeah, and it's for real. It's not just training. So no, we were flying out of Kuwait, and I was leading my first ever combat mission as well, which was pretty scary. And yeah, and basically we'd swept up all our targets. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was pitch black, and just as we were coming back over towards Kuwait, my nav just happened to look down and saw the flash of a surface-to-air missile launching. It was sent in a really unusual mode. You normally always get, we've got a radar homing and warning receiver, the RHWR, and it basically gives an indication as to if a radar is looking at you on the ground. We would know all the different coding for all the different radars. So you can see if like a radar for a surface-to-air missile 6, an SA6 or an SA10, one of these different missile systems is looking at you, and you get a spike, and then we would move around it. But we hadn't got any of that. And so it was sent in heat-seeking mode, really unusual, very low possibility of kill, PK. But if it gets to you, it gets to you undetected. So it just so happened my nav was looking over his right shoulder and saw it launch, and he just sort of went, oh my God, brake. So we broke away from the missile, and at the moment critique where you do a maneuver and you what's called chill your engines, the exact moment he puts the flares out, which act as a decoy. They're, you know, pieces of sort of, you know, material that burn at an incredibly hot intensity, and they act as that decoy that's going to take that missile away from you. And that's exactly what happened. The moment we watched in our rear view mirrors, this missile go from being locked on, it pulled off, and it's exploded about 2 miles away. So that was really hairy. And then the whole complexity of the mission then changed because there were about, I think it was up to about 80, I can't give you the exact number, but about 80 aircraft were airborne, and they're out of 4 different countries, and they've all got different roles, different responsibilities. But once an aggressive act was made towards any one of the coalition forces, then you are entitled to prosecute an attack on a target. So we went from being a reconnaissance mission or even a show of force to subtly re-attacking a target.
Yeah, aggressive force, yeah.
And basically our target was a radar station that we found out was the radar station that had handed out the height of our aircraft to this unknown surface-to-air missile cell. And so it's that feeling of it doesn't matter how much briefing you do, there's always going to be latent threats that reside in any system or organisation, indeed, that when you tie it with complacency, because we'd never had any activity in that area, then ultimately you're most vulnerable. And so Yeah, we radioed through and they told us to stand by, but we were really quickly running out of fuel. And in the end, after consultation with the team, we decided we would head south to find an air-to-air refueling tanker. And we got down to it, and I remember it was pitch black, and there was this blowing sandstorm coming up from Saudi. And we spotted the tanker, and we realised with horror it wasn't the right call sign. And basically, our British tanker had broken, possibly due to defence cuts, and it had been replaced by an American tanker, a KC-135. And it's got a really different refueling system. You know, a guy sits at the back and he flies this drone onto you. And I'd never done it before. You know, I wasn't cleared to do it. It's like trying something brand new in a war zone at 2 in the morning when you've just been shot. Yeah. Lovely training environment. Try it. You'll be good. Yeah. Anyway, I said to my boss, I'm not qualified, but he said, well, try it anyway. So I had 2 attempts and I wasn't successful. And my nav said, oh, press on. And I thought, God, if I do carry on pressing on, then it's going to prevent the rest of my team from having a go. And so I overruled him and we moved across onto the wing and we let my boss and my senior exec refuel, and they were really successful, went back into Iraq and they located the target. And I remember landing back at base with my number 4. And I just felt like this sense of doom, like, oh my God, you're rubbish, you're no good. Sort of hit by that imposter syndrome again a bit. And then this hand appeared on my shoulder. It was my nav and he went, that was a really good call. And I said, sorry, what was that whole press on thing? And he said, oh, I shouldn't have said it. He said, man, it's my last job. I was a trials officer and I'd spent 3 years on the design, the development and the testing of this weapon, this paveway bomb. And he said, it's never been dropped in any theatre of war. And I just was desperate to be the first person to drop it in anger. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting concept. That would have been good to know. But he says, yes, I was a bit emotionally involved in the whole thing. And it was a real wake up call that, you know, and you must have this in the fire service as well as in the Paris, that we see junior people coming in, and although we do have hierarchy, there is very much a sense of like that psychologically safe environment to challenge. If you see a better way of doing it, that you do speak up and people are really encouraged to, and we'd always been encouraged to do that. And I thought, actually, if I hadn't had that training that said, do challenge, don't just accept things, you know, be inquisitive, that ultimately I wouldn't have had the confidence that my voice would have been heard. And that's why I did sort of overrule them and say, no, I'm going to stop. And actually it was exactly the right thing to do. So, you know, those are the positives. So yeah, I had lots and lots of incidents and other sorts of things, you know, pretty extreme events happening in Canada and Goose Bay where I spun down a runway and, you know, but ultimately, yeah, I'm still here.
No, good stuff. I mean, yeah, I mean that call you talk about there, and it is a difficult, because you could have, you know, look, whether it's being a fighter pilot, whether it is being in the paras, whether it's another infantry unit, you train to do a certain role. So you had the opportunity there where you were going to actually kind of bomb a target, do something you train for, you know, you wait your whole career, but you selflessly gave that up to allow someone else, because and that is a very, very strong leadership quality, I believe, the ability to say no, as much as your gut instinct and almost your ego is going, overdrive, going, well, no, I want to do this, you've got to realize there's a lot of reasons there that I can't, and you have to pass that off for someone else there, and it is a difficult one. But also, like you say, your training kicks in, very, very similar to fire service. You know, with our kind of role, you may be 2 years, you know, you may still be in your probation, but at a house fire at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's people hanging out a window, might seem dead obvious to the OIC to commit a crew in through this front door, but you may spot something that someone else won't, and you've got to speak up. I mean, these professions, that's good. You've got to have the confidence to speak up. And I come back to say a little bit, might have been a little bit difficult for you as well, again, and I don't like to use the female card, but it is, you've said before, with it being kind of the environment it was at times, you've got that extra thing as well, where are you going to get criticized for speaking up against a predominantly male environment? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing though is I'd never felt that. You know, we see a lot of talk about misogyny or issues within the forces, and apart from one incident of bullying in my entire career, I don't think I've always been lifted by all the guys around me. You know, they've been my wingmen and women, you know, but ultimately there's that feeling of real support that I had. And, you know, that's why now I hate to see any bad press really about things coming out and problems that have been created, but for us, I was just so delighted to be given the opportunity to be having and to doing the job I was doing, that and the people I met were absolutely fantastic. They're still my best friends today. And so I think it's very important to recognize that okay, you were a woman in a man's world, but you could make a difference as well. And actually what you bring as a consequence of that is that whole diversity. But it's also, I saw it going from being quite misogynistic and quite red in character to actually suddenly being a little bit softer, people talking a bit more about emotions, having proper conversations. Not the egos were sort of being chiseled away a bit. And I think that's the benefits of having that mixed gender team, without a doubt.
Oh no, 100%. It is, because again, we kind of see it with incidents. Obviously, we do kind of a lot of safeguarding as well, and 4 or 5 burly firefighters my size walking into a property to chat to maybe a female that's struggling with something is not always ideal. Whereas if my partner is to go in, they open up more. So again, it is about that whole diverse thing. And I'm glad with the current situation we're in now, where it's not really a big deal. There's a lot of stuff at the minute with fire services all over the UK being kind of picked up by the government and being investigated for this and that. And I don't like to believe it, but I'm sure it still happens quite a lot. But which is kind of sad, really. Well, I was hoping we're in a point, we're in 2024. It shouldn't be a thing anymore. And that's the same with racism and everything else. I still can't believe there is that kind of thing in the current environment. I can't quite get my head around it. But yeah, it is what it is, and hopefully we will continue to improve on that front. But yeah, so you so how long did you serve for in total? Did you say 17 years?
Yeah, I did 17 years, or just under 17 years, and then I left and I joined as a volunteer reservist. So I kept a sort of, my rank for 8 years until COVID. So I was flying cadets at the weekend. I'd go and do the air cadet flying and things like that. So it was really nice to sort of close that circle and sort of keep that connection going with the forces as well. And that was sort of going hand in hand with me setting up my own business as a speaker, as a coach. And doing a lot of traveling doing that. And so after we were grounded, obviously, during COVID, and then after COVID, my speaking side of career just went through the roof. So I ended up being really, really busy and away, probably more than I was ever away in the Air Force, actually, doing a lot of traveling to do all the speeches all over the world. And actually, I therefore just decided that it was probably a natural time for me to stop flying. And so first time in my life, actually, I find myself no longer flying and no longer qualified on anything, which is a real shame.
What's your reasoning for that? Just you felt that you've
time. Yeah, just there's only so many hours in the day, and I've got 2 children as well, and they were teenagers, and I really needed to just prioritize spending a bit of time with them, really. So not that I particularly wanted to, because they were teenagers, but there you go. They're now 6'6" hulks at 19 and 20. So in fact, one of them's toying with the idea of joining the fire service. So any top tips for him?
Yeah. Well, no, tell him to be in touch. I will quite happily. I mean, I've been in 11 years now. It's changed a lot, the recruitment process. But my fiance is very, very clued up with that side of stuff. She's been in maybe 5 years, 6 years. So any questions and fancies joining, please, you've got my WhatsApp number anyway. Find me a message and we'll talk him through the process, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
No dramas. But yeah, no, so obviously the motivational speaking has gone from strength to strength. Do you travel all over the country or all over the world doing that?
Yeah, I travel all over the world. I think I did 17 different countries last year. Wow. So yeah, no, it's busy. I love it. I really enjoy it, actually. I love the fact that one day I'm speaking to school children, like primary school children, and we're getting them pretending to be airplanes or biggles, getting their eyes up and wearing night vision goggles. And then the next day I'm speaking to a room full of CEOs. And it's how you change your style of delivery. And, I love the fact that you can be a bit naughty with humour with some groups, then you recognise that you've got a very multinational audience and that the humour won't translate, and therefore you need to think about how you're going to deliver to that audience and what the key messaging. And Yeah, and you know, a lot of people say, oh, is it not a bit boring delivering the same sort of material? And you think, well, no, because it's to a different audience every single day in a different setting with different themes and different takeaways that you're trying to get across. You know, I mean, every company will have different values and, you know, different things that they want to talk about. And so, yeah, you might use the same basic stories, but you've got to be really agile in your own thinking as to how you adapt that story to make it relevant to the audience.
Yeah, well, you'll have, obviously, we've only touched on sort of, you know, 30 minutes of your career here. I mean, you will have had loads of different stories and loads of different sort of instances that you can relate to various different circumstances. That's how you've learned, and, you know, to be a leader, and how you've kind of taken on those things abroad. So I suppose if you've got the ability to kind of be fluid with it and kind of relate a particular instance that you've been involved in to a specific audience, then it is kind of. But obviously, you've probably learned that as you've gone, haven't you?
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't leave the Air Force thinking I'd ever become a speaker particularly, but I was a bit drunk at a dinner party and I was telling the story about the mission in Iraq, and someone was at the table and just said, oh my gosh, this would make a fantastic after dinner speech or a keynote speech. And at a conference, I said, a what? And I'd never been to a conference because, you know, we were in the military and you just don't do that. And so I went to see a few. In fact, it was an ex-Royal Marine, Alan Chambers. And I remember standing there and I said to him at the end, oh my God, that was brilliant. How'd you do that? You know, any top tips? And he said, yeah, be yourself. And I was like, oh, okay, can I have a bit more than that? You know, like names of agents. And he said, that's all you're getting, just be yourself. And I thought it was really reflective because it made me think about, I'd been trying to be somebody I wasn't. So when I left the Air Force, I was trained to be an airline pilot. I'd never really wanted to do that job, if I'm honest. I did it because that's this assumption we've got this one skill set, probably like when you left the military. It's almost like, right, what's my skill set and how do I translate that into a civilian career? And so most pilots leave and just become commercial pilots. And there's nothing wrong with that. A fantastic job if that's what you want to do. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I thought, you know what, why am I, you know, pursuing a career here which I don't think is going to make me really happy? And then when this guy sort of said about, you know, be yourself, it made me think, yeah, maybe I do need to take a big leap of faith. And so I set up my own business and called it Experience from the Front Line. And, you know, initially, you know, I was just putting it out to schools, and then I'd invited to the odd speech day, and you know, and then someone said, oh, you have to speak, you know, just start at the local WIs and local guides and do the, and actually as it happened, I didn't. My first corporate speech was at Brocket Hall in Hertfordshire, you know, speaking to 16 industry leaders from the insurance sector. And I thought, yeah, actually just, you know, if you've got a story and it's worth telling and you can develop the skills to tell it well and adapt it, well, then there's going to be a place for you, I think, as a speaker. And you know, everyone sort of said, oh, have you been trained? And I was like, no, this is me. And one of the skill sets, or one of the things that people always comment on as to what do they like about good speakers, is authenticity and people being real. They don't want a really polished person that's not going to, you know, make people laugh, that's just going to deliver the, you know, the bullet points. They want someone that's just going to be themselves on the stage. And that's just something I've really learned, actually, you know, over the last 10 years of doing what I've been doing now.
But also that is a kind of daunting process as well, isn't it? Standing up on a stage. And I know obviously there's aspects within your military career where you have to get out and give, whether it be sets of orders. But obviously that's a much smaller kind of group of individuals that you do that to stood in front of maybe hundreds of people in some instances. I suspect it is a daunting process, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a daunting one, but I used to be really nervous. I'd always like feel sick before doing it, to be honest. And a lot of that went back to, I think it was my first ever speech when I was in the Air Force and I was going through officer training, and the instructor said, yeah, you clicked your tongue 17 times and you said 14 times and you'll never make the speaker. And you know, you put yourself in boxes, don't you? It's sort of like a bit like we say writing a book. You know, I'd never been great at English at school, so therefore I am not a writer. And I think, you know what, we've got to redefine who we are and recognise that, you know, yeah, I might click my tongue. Well, so what? As long as it doesn't become really annoying, you know, if you can just deliver in a really natural way. And the first speech I ever gave, I had it all on cards and I was reading it out. And this one person said, oh, it's a brilliant story, Mandy, but it's yours. Do you really need cards? And I was like, oh my God, getting rid of the safety blanket of cards. And I just sort of, and I threw them away. And I have never, ever used cards on any speech I've ever delivered since. So, you know, I managed to sort of learn it, remember it, come across as natural. I think, yeah, the only time I've done that since was my dad's eulogy, and I thought, yeah, I want to make sure that's right. So I did have some cards for that one, but apart from that, you know, it's been off the cuff a bit. So
yeah, but again, it comes with that experience of doing it. But again, isn't it? It's putting yourself out of your comfort zone, because, like you said,
yeah,
you've come out the Air Force there, and it's like, right, I'll go in and fly an airline, you know, be an airline pilot, because that's what I've done. And at the same, I came out of the Paras and thought, well, I'll go down the mercenary route with the close protection in Iraq, because
yeah,
I'm a soldier. And for years I did that, and it wasn't until I'd been out maybe sort of 9-10 years when I thought, well, maybe I should join different career change, and hence joining the fire service. But again, it's about putting yourself out the comfort zone. And I am not a big fan of talking in front of people at all. It's kind of one of my, and I keep meaning to want to kind of do something where I can talk, just to get over that phobia. It's about
yeah.
telling, no one likes to do it, but to challenge yourself to do it and speak. I don't mind. I can talk to 2 or 3 people on a webcam, as you can see. I can waffle on for hours. But yeah, when it comes to group of people, so no, hats off. It's not an easy kind of skill to
No,
do.
it's not. But I think once you start to really enjoy it, you know, nowadays I love it, and I love the fact that I can pause and there's an absolute silence, and people are like, and I tell a story when I was coming back from America when 9/11 happened and we were tanking, you know, and they shut American airspace on us, and we were literally in a thick cloud over the Atlantic doing air-to-air refueling, coming back, and it's like, what the hell's going on? And when I'm telling that story, I sort of say, you know, they shut American airspace, and people, there's literally silence in the room, and I can almost hold it for 2 or 3. I love it. I can sort of stand there at the front. I think, oh, I'll just hold that for a minute, you know. And you can see people just like. Then you say, you know, obviously the date was 9/11, and you know, then you develop that story about sort of how you make decisions when you don't know the bigger picture, which, you know, is something that you guys do all the time. When you're in a you know, in an incident, you know, you don't know what the whole picture is, but you have got to make some decisions. I think I read this whole act on 80. If you've got 80% of the knowledge, then surely that's enough to make a decision, and making a decision is better than none. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, a lot of, you draw on stuff because 9 times out of 10 you've been to a very, very similar incident, and I should imagine it's the same with the Air Force and stuff like that. So you draw off experience, you draw off, because you've done it. It's almost like muscle memory, isn't it?
Yeah,
There'll be certain differences, but that's why experience is massive, in my opinion. Experience is huge, because if you've never been to particular incidents and all of a sudden you're thrown in, you're going to be like, what the hell's going on? Whereas if you've done that incident or a very, very similar one 20, 30, 40 times, house fires, whatever it may be, you can
yeah,
then go, right, I know how to deal with aspects of it, and
yeah.
there's less to kind of learn and digest. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
It's a bit like when you learn to drive, isn't it? You know, and you think,
Yeah.
no wonder young people crash cars, because they've not got that experience of seeing the fact that there's I was just driving home the other day, actually, and this bus was, you know, turning into my road. And I, of course, did what any experienced driver would do, which is you stop, because you know the bus is going to have to swing onto your side of the road. But I thought, if I was a young person and I'm driving on my side of the road to my junction, and my end of my junction's there, you're just going to carry on, and then the bus is going to hit you, or you're going to hit the bus. Yeah. And it's just that whole thing of, when you've seen it before, it just becomes very natural that your situational awareness becomes so much more enhanced, because you've seen it, you know what's going to happen, you can predict those sort of scenarios, and it's not so overwhelming. But it's about sometimes remembering and putting yourself back there, you know, what it's like right in those early days when, you know, you must going into a house fire for the first time thinking, oh my God, you know, how am I ever going to cope with this environment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, it's a good, like I say, we all do we chose the professions we choose, like yourself, because we kind of want a little bit. I like to think we want a bit different. We
Yeah.
want the excitement. I never wanted, a lot of my friends went and did, and there's nothing like, I have nothing against that. And, you know, financially, they're probably in a lot better position than I am, being bricklayers or joiners or plumbers and everything else. But I've tried things like that, but I could never, ever be
No,
that person. I can't. I have to have something that tests me constantly, you know.
yeah, and it's interesting because my daughter, my stepdaughter Jessie, she's ended up in the Met Police actually, because she just said, you know, hearing your stories and Dad's stories, he was in the Navy and you know, and has been in the aviation industry for the whole of his life. You know, it's made her realise that she couldn't do a 9 to 5 job. She didn't want to do an office job. She wanted to do something that was different, that was challenging, that, you know, would be varied. And so she actively sought out something, you know, like the Met Police, where she would be challenged. I think, you know, hopefully that is something that my children will have taken at least from me when they finally decide what careers to go into. But,
Yeah, but it comes down to that as well. My lad as well, he's toyed with the idea of the RAF. I wouldn't necessarily want him to go in, not because I'm obviously a big fan of the paras. I was in that unit, but it doesn't necessarily, it gives you life experiences, it gives you experiences, but it doesn't necessarily gear you up for when you leave. You kind
yeah,
of, you're back to square one, whether you do 22 years, 10 years, you come out, you've not got a lot of transferable or civilian qualifications
yeah,
to bring across. There'll be people that will watch this and will argue the toss that they do and they don't. But whereas a lot of other industries, you gather trade. I suppose you can do courses in the past, but I just think there's a lot more doors. And do I want him to be on Salisbury Plain for a month in February,
no,
freezing his nuts off?
opens that.
Probably not. No, I don't. I want him to have a bit more of a cushy kind of, not cushy, that's to be, you know what I mean? A different kind of, a better sort of
Yeah,
career, as it were.
yeah,
But yeah, it is, and hopefully they will kind of, like to say, they will go and seek something, because it comes back to what we started off on there, really, wouldn't it? And if you find a job that you really really like, it's not
yeah,
like a job at all, is it? So,
yeah,
and you do not want them to go into a job that they're going to dread and hate, because that'll only end up sort of pissing them off, won't it?
yeah, definitely, definitely.
Right. Well, I lastly want to touch on your book. I know you've got a book. Have you had the book out for quite a while? Is that right?
Yeah, it's been out. Gosh, it's been out for nearly 4 years now. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's, yeah, it's called An Officer, Not a Gentleman. Thank you, Richard Gere. Doff my hat to him. Yeah, and yeah, it's basically, it's done really well actually. It's sold over 30,000 copies now, and yeah, I'm delighted with, you know, the comments, and, you know, not just from young people, but, you know, from a whole host of different people that have read it. And I think it's quite representative for many people. It brings back some really good memories of times in the forces, you know, generally. And what's lovely is when I get comments back from people who have been in the military and said, oh my goodness, Mandy, you've literally taken me down memory lane. And that's across all forces. So even people from the paras have contacted me and said they've enjoyed it. I mean, who would have thought it, hey?
Who'd have thought, eh? That they can read, for starters. Who knew?
Well, they must have listened to it on audiobook.
They must have
We're
done. Well,
allowed to that.
most of us are deaf now, as well as, you know, from various conflicts as well. So that's out as well. I don't know.
But for anyone that's listening, that's called military banter, by the way. We're not being offensive. We're just being humorous.
Yes, that is part of the problem as well. That and I come on to touching on lastly is the dark humor. I suppose that helps, and to people that have never been involved in kind of sort of nasty incidents or in the military environment or any in general. The dark humor within reason gets you through, and you joke about some things that sometimes inappropriate,
Yeah,
but to the outsider it's a little bit difficult to understand that, and it's always one of them for debate. There is a line with it, obviously, but you know, you kind of laugh and joke about things that some people perhaps would see that as inappropriate, don't you, to get
yeah,
you through, and it helps as a coping
we
mechanism.
do. And it's just like medics do. You know, my sister's a doctor, and my gosh, some of the dark humor that they have is just horrific. And yeah, I mean, in fact, one of my son's been traveling recently, and the lad he was traveling with got bottled by someone that was off their heads on drugs. Another Brit traveler actually, and basically, you know, he came out of a nightclub and went up to him and went, "You ginger." C word, and then bottled him, and he ended up in hospital with 64 stitches. And I was showing a friend of mine a picture in the military, and their comment was, he's not even that ginger. And I was just like, I mean, that is just military humor, isn't it? You know, you're facing a horrific situation, and the comment is, God, he's not even that ginger. I mean, really, you know, not the 64 stitches and this huge like hole in his arm, but the fact that, you know, that's it. But that's
I don't even know if it's a British, a military thing in general, because I have quite a few friends that are like US military, US Marines, and one thing they have said is the British,
yeah,
the British military is very, very literally, we could be in the face of adversity, pinned down by enemy fire, and someone will look at someone else and crack a joke about something, whereas it's like, how are you managing to joke in this scenario? But that's just how we deal with things, and I like that, and I wouldn't change anything about that. And hopefully them sort of things and that kind of carries on throughout. I'm sure it will. It's almost one of them things. But no, look, I am conscious that I've kept you for over an hour.
Oh, where does time go?
I know. But no, I appreciate you taking the time. It's fascinating. I could literally talk to you all day. My fiance was like, "Oh, like get us, see if she can get me like on a plane." She's a big fan of yours, by the way. She just said that to me on several occasions. She goes, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to this podcast." She's been done a bit of reading about yourself and stuff. So she'll enjoy this podcast. She'll not enjoy my voice because she hears it all the time, but she'll probably enjoy yours.
Nice.
But yeah, I'll have a quick chat with you off air if that's okay.
Stuff.
No, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Chris.